Move all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. Move all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. Tall trees fall aside, every bramble I slash with the sword of freedom. Tall trees fall aside, every bramble I slash with the sword of freedom. Once more. Move all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. Move all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. Tall trees fall aside, every bramble I slash with the sword of freedom. Tall trees fall aside, every bramble I slash with the sword of freedom. Okay, very good. Forgot my sword.
Good morning again, and welcome to Sunday Service. Welcome to those joining online. I'm reading today from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda, written by Swami Kriya-yoga. This week's topic is entitled, How Democratic is Truth? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. We live in an age when people assume that knowledge should be available equally to all. In matters susceptible of judgment by normal common sense, however, everyone knows there are exceptions. Access to a control room for intercontinental missiles is limited by universal consent to a very few. Access to the controls of a passenger airline is limited to those with the necessary knowledge for operating them, and also to those with the proper authorization. If people don't see the disadvantages of making more subtle knowledge universally available, it is only because they are ignorant of the risks involved. In the case of subtle knowledge, the main disadvantage to making it universally available is the harm it might do to one who isn't ready for it, and who might even mock it. True, by mocking truth he might undermine the faith of a few truth seekers, but then such tests can also be beneficial as a means of strengthening faith. Again true, the clever doubter's misrepresentation of those truths may dissuade a few seekers from following the spiritual path. But if a seeker is truly sincere, he will recognize the truth eventually because it resonates with his own being. No, the greatest problem accrues to the shallow doubter himself. To give him an opportunity to affirm his ignorance might only estrange him even more from the truth, delaying the time when he will turn, as all people must, eventually, to the light. Thus, the scriptures advise not secrecy, but discretion in sharing the truth. Jesus Christ says in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, "Give not that which is holy unto dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you." And Sri Krishna says in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, "Never speak of these truths to one who is without self-control or devotion, who renders no service, who does not care to hear, or who speaks ill of me." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning. I was pondering this week's reading where it says, truth doesn't come to those who aren't ready for it. And I remember the first time I heard the spiritual saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It was in my college philosophy class, and my professor said this. And I argued with him and said, I am ready. I have been ready. How long does it take? And I just, back and forth, and he was very cool. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Well, it was fully 5 years from the time I was demanding that I was ready and I wanted to know, I wanted to understand the spiritual path. I had been a very frustrated child and teenager, just railing against the status quo, you might say. Why do people die? Why are babies born deformed? Why is there suffering? Why is there famine? Why are animal species disappearing through extinction? What is happening? This crazy world, the politics, the wars, it was just very frustrating to me. And so I went through a long, what Dharmadas calls my existential period. And I actually wrote a lot of poetry. Fortunately, almost none of it still remains. But I actually won poetry contests, I think because it was so dark and heavy and unhappy. People said, oh, this is good. But I wrote stuff like, we crawl and mate and die, victims of our own mediocrity. We laugh now, but boy, it was painful when it was happening. So God then showed me through those 5 years all these different paths that I could take. I worked for the welfare department at the state of Ohio, so I got to see, a life of public service. You could do that. I worked at Boeing Aircraft Company, and I looked up at the corporate ladder. You could do that, you could go up there. I worked for a deep sea diving company, and they had a few years before been busted for smuggling marijuana from Mexico. So, there was this nefarious world that opened up. You could do that. I was in college for a long time, so it was like you could just keep going to college. You could be an academic and just do that on and on. And then I traveled across the country with a girlfriend, hitchhiking. Never told my parents about this ever. And we ended up from Los Angeles to Alabama. There was some sort of festival going on there. As a young person, you do these sorts of things. And we were there, and then I connected with another girl who had a car. This was a big step up. So then we traveled from Alabama to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, summertime, and we fell in with all these people who worked during the summer so that they could ski all winter without working. So I thought, oh, well, that's a lifestyle. So Divine Mother showed me all these different lives that I could have. And then we picked up a hitchhiker, this girlfriend and I, and he had a magazine. And I said, I don't know why, but I said, can I see your magazine? I opened it up to a community based on yoga principles. And I memorized the address. I didn't have time to read the article because he got out of the car. 900 Allegheny Star Route. That was the old address of Ananda Village. And I had that in my mind. Oh, a whole community of people doing yoga? Wow. So I was in Steamboat Springs with my girlfriend and thinking about what I wanted to do next. Stay there with all these friends that she had. I thought, no, I want to just see this community. What is this community all about? So she said, well, I'm going as far as Salt Lake City. You're going to Nevada City, but I'm going to Salt Lake City, and I'll take you that far, and then I have to go south. So we're in Salt Lake City, pulled up to a stoplight. Summertime, the windows are rolled down. I'm leaning out of the car, and these two girls drive up in another car, and they stop at the stoplight. Their windows are down. And I go, hi, where are you guys going? And they said, Nevada City, California. I said, can I get a ride with you? They said, sure, hop in. So let me back up to when I was living in Los Angeles a couple years before that. And a friend had handed me Autobiography of a Yogi. And I looked at it, I opened it up, I read one passage. And I closed the book and gave it back. Not for me. And the same friend took me to Lake Shrine. Well, I fell in love with Lake Shrine. And I would go there every chance I got. I never talked to anybody. You know, people in orange looked really scary to me. But I would just kind of find a little quiet, secluded place. I didn't even know the word meditation, but I would just sit there quietly, close my eyes, be very still. And it was the vibration that just moved my soul. I just loved it so much. So I get to Nevada City, California, and I come up to Ananda. I hitchhiked up to Ananda. I don't recommend hitchhiking. Master said never to do it, but I didn't know that then. I got there, and the first thing this person gave me was Autobiography of a Yogi. And I looked at this, and I thought, this is kind of fishy. And I walked into the kitchen of the apprentice village, and there was a calendar on the wall with a lake shrine on it. I thought, this guru is chasing me. And this time I read Autobiography of a Yogi. It took me 3 days, and I was just absolutely mesmerized because I could feel something. I felt like I could trust this person, that this was the reality that I had been struggling to find. All my childhood, all my youth, this reality that's so much bigger, more beautiful than the craziness of this world. And I started to realize that it wasn't God's fault that there was war and famine and grief. It was what we do with our lives. We create these things. And so I had hope for the first time. Something within me just relaxed that, oh, there is a divine order. There is something I can do, something I can learn about that will help me navigate through life. There's another spiritual saying that it takes 10,000 hours of hearing the teachings in order to really realize them, to really understand them. 10,000 hours. That's a lot of Sunday services. And what I love about this saying is that it says, during those 10,000 hours, the teachings perfume the mind to get it receptive, to understand. I love that. It perfumes the mind. So one of the things, I'll just close with this one last little story. I got to Ananda, it was August 9th. I'd never remember dates, but that one is emblazoned in my heart. So next Saturday is my 50-year anniversary. Isn't that amazing? Thank you, God. I was lost and I was found. 50 years. So one of the things that I did, I've always thought this is a great way to get a job if you ever really need a job. I volunteered at Master's Market. I was working full-time in the Ananda Gardens. It was very big for the apprentice program in those days. So I'd work 8 or 10 hours there, and then I'd go help at Master's Market because they needed to unload the produce truck or whatever. And I didn't think about ever getting a job. I was just, wanting to help, wanting to serve this amazing thing that I had found. And so when the garden was over and jobs were very scarce at Ananda in those days, Parvati, who had started the Master's Market, selling apples out of the back of her truck, she offered me a job. So that was a way for me to be able to stay at Ananda. And I've always thought, what a perfect thing to do. If you want a job, go volunteer where you want to work. And they get to know you and they want you. But anyway, I worked there and then I managed it for a while. And then Ananda Construction Company, all the builder guys, wanted to build spec houses and they wanted stained glass windows in them. So they asked me, would you be willing to learn how to do stained glass windows and help us? So I went from being in the busy market with people all day long to being in a workshop alone, working 10, 12-hour days, just working on creating stained glass windows. And what I did was listen to Swami Kriyananda's talks all day, every day. Sometimes the same tapes over and over and over. And I value that time in my life so much. Of course, I had artistic freedom. I could do whatever I wanted with the windows I was making. The guys would just give me the dimensions and say, fill it up. So I was happy that way. But moreover, I was quiet, concentrated, and listening deeply. I don't think I even made 10,000 hours then, but maybe. Anyway, it was a great time to just absorb. And we have time in our lives. We drive here and there. Listen to his voice. We're doing housework. Listen. You're cooking. Listen. Fill your mind with the right thing. No doom scrolling. And I say that to myself. It's very addictive. You start looking at how horrible things are and you just keep seeing how much more horrible they are. It's always been horrible. Material life is fraught with pain and suffering. Our niece just had a baby. labor, pain, it's all for a good cause. It's all a blessing, but still, not even from love and giving birth can we escape pain in this world. Death is often not very fun to go through. There's a lot of suffering. I remember when my dad was passing away, and I prayed to Lahiri Mahashaya, please spare his life. I know you can do it. You've raised people from the dead. You can do this. Please. And the answer that came to me was, ever think about Lazarus? Yes, he was raised from the dead, but he's not still alive. He eventually had to pass away. It's the way this world works. Just like it's the way this world works that there's a disciple-guru relationship. And when I came to Ananda, not very long after, some couple of weeks, I think, one of the ministers, teachers, said to me, do you want to take discipleship with Yogananda? And I didn't know anything. I didn't know the teachings. I didn't know about kriya-yoga. I didn't know about yoga postures. Hardly. I'd learned in college some, but I didn't know. All I knew was that I had been seeking with all my heart and soul. And this is what God gave me. And I said without hesitation, yes, make me your disciple. And I, in my mind, knew something that we always tell people now, which is, if Yogananda isn't your guru, he will help you find your guru. Because there's no competition among masters. They don't grab people to themselves. They want you to be happy. They want you to be free. And so, 50 years, and I've never regretted a moment of it. Because what Yogananda has brought us is a true teaching. It's ancient, it's eternal. It's not some flash in the pan, advertised in Yoga Journal, brand new guru, here you go, wealth, health, lots of money, everything. It's not that kind of thing. It's a deep soul connection with God. And in that way, we will all be free if we open our hearts and accept these divine teachings.
This topic, I sometimes chuckle at the topic names of the Sunday services, because Swami sort of asks these impossible questions. Is it this or is it that? And the answer is yes, it's both. But in this case, there's a very obvious answer. How democratic is truth? Not very. It's like, I suppose you could say it depends. The answer is really it depends, because if we're in tune with truth, then we vote on truth. We vote for truth. But if we're not, then, we're just among the lower consciousness that Jesus is saying, don't cast your pearls in front of. Don't give that which is sacred. And, it's interesting how we think that we're so evolved and enlightened, and yet we're struggling and we're suffering and creating disaster and misery in the world. I love this Whispers reading today. It was amazing. divine, we're sort of welcoming the disaster because it frees us. It releases us from all the misery that we've created, all the karma that we've created. And in a sense, when Christ is saying, don't cast your pearls before swine, don't give that which is holy unto dogs, he's not just saying, yes, there is this robust sense of humor, and you get the feeling that, he's dishing it out nice and hot and heavy so that people get it. People can smile and chuckle and kind of go, yeah, okay, I get that concept. But he's also, all these teachings, when the master gives a teaching, yes, there is an outward level of it, but then there's a subtler level. And often there's a subtler and a subtler and a subtler level. Well, one of the subtler levels of this is that there's a part of ourselves that is a lower consciousness. And we don't want to live on that level. We don't want to mix up the holy with the degraded part of it. We were with India. Yes, we were with India. We were with Swamiji in India for quite a few years. And so we traveled with him all over the place, which meant that we were staying in hotels and we were, just moving. And his mind was always revolving around the truth. He was always revolving around what's the next step? What can I share with people? How can I make my guru's teachings more accessible to people? So he would be writing a book or he'd be, filming a video, etc. But his mind was always busy with how can I express this? And sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and he would start writing. And I remember one particular, we had just arrived in India maybe 3 weeks before. We were on a trip with him and he woke up in the wee hours of the night. He called us at like 6 a.m, which that was not business hours for him ever. 6 a.m. was not, he was either meditating or he was asleep. That was not business hours. But he had woken up early. Master had given him a whole new concept for all of Ananda, the way of Ananda Sangis. He wrote out this whole thing, and on this trip he had vowed not to work. So then Master gave him work to do. But he hadn't brought his computer. That was his way of not working. He didn't have his computer. So he was handwriting this stuff on stationery from the hotel. And he called us to say, will you bring me your computer? So I brought him my computer, which just frustrated the heck out of him because mine was a Mac and his was a PC and none of the shortcuts worked and it was just a big mess. So then I ended up typing out the words on the Mac so that I could follow it and not frustrate him. But anyway, on one of those trips, Nirmala captured, and we even made a Xerox of it this morning because we have his handwriting literally on the back of an envelope. And he wrote these words, and it's somehow this segues to the topic for me, and it's also very touching. Swami wrote, and this may have ended up in a book. This may have been, he was trying to capture a thought clearly enough to slide it into something that he was writing. If he did, I don't remember which book it ended up in. But he said, in society, generally speaking, the impetus for any upliftment of consciousness depends on women and on feminine influence. Any society that fails to respect its women is self-condemned to become or remain backward and degraded. Now, we can take the outward side of that and look at the world and point to plenty of examples of both sides of that. Places where women are respected, places where they're not. And we see the results in both cases. Places that everyone wants to live, places that no one wants to live. Basically, that is pretty much the combination. We can take it a little deeper and say, look at ourselves. Because, the men could kick back and say, okay, ladies, it's your responsibility. He's saying it. But what he's saying is feminine influence. Well, we all have feminine influence in our lives if we choose to acknowledge it, if we choose to respect that side of ourselves, and that includes men. And so here's a little story that highlights this in an interesting way. There was a lady who was married to someone who was described as a stingy cloth merchant. And they were having dinner together one night, and there was a knock at the door, and the husband went to the door, and there was a beggar there. And the beggar wanted something to eat. And the man said something nasty to him and slammed the door in his face, and came back, and the wife was asking him, and he said, it's beggars. And, he had no use for this. And so they finished their dinner. Well, that night, his warehouse where he had all his cloth burned to the ground. And in the morning, he had nothing. And he came to his wife and said, we have nothing. You must return to your family because I can't support you anymore. And she did. And he divorced her. And without her even knowing it, at least not immediately. And some time went by, and she married again. And this time she married someone who had a different sort of character. And again, one night they were having dinner, and there was a knock at the door. And this time, that second husband went to the door, and there was a beggar there. And he came back and said to his wife, we have plenty of food. Let's give him half of what we have. And so he asked her to bring it to the fellow. And she did, and she came back in tears because who was it? It was her first husband. And she came back, and, he sees her this way and says, what happened? And she said, that was my first husband. And he says, oh, if that was your first husband, then I was the beggar that came to your home. And, if you think about that, it's a feminine influence. Even if it's not a person, it's that compassion. It's that ability to see. And if we don't have that, then it's like we deny the holiness that Christ is talking about in the other part of the reading. And yes, there's a certain humor and there's a certain robustness to it, but that part of ourselves it's a quality of the heart. And without that quality of the heart, we don't grow spiritually. It's like we rise and we hit this barrier that says we can't go any higher, we can't go any farther. And we all have the potential to, like referring back to what Nirmala was saying about when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and being frustrated. I was frustrated by that. I read the same thing and it was like, blast it all, I am ready. Where the heck is this? But it wasn't time. And all those stages in between, all those potential lifetimes, the Boeing, the ski bum, the deep sea diving pirate incarnation. She left out a few, by the way. She was on the board of directors of a Methodist church in there too. She could have been part of that. Could have kept going with that. I mean, anyway, there's all of that, but all of those things, it's like are part of that growth process, and we get to the place where the heart opens naturally of its own. We don't pry it open. Did you ever, we used to do this with my dad for some reason. He would have something in his hand that we wanted, like a piece of candy or whatever. And he'd have his fingers shut and we would start prying one, we would get his thumb off of it. and then start on the next finger. Oh, but then the thumb snaps back down again, and then you get one or two fingers and then the other ones would snap down. I mean, it just was, we could never get at it. He would have to release it before it just was never going to happen. Well, it's like that with the heart too. You don't pry the heart open. You can squirt WD-40 on the hinges. Okay, that part, the door of your heart, a little oil might help. But there comes a point when it just flies open. And when we're ready for that, then then the teacher appears. Or if the disciple is ready, then the guru appears. But prior to that point, it's conversation. It's discussion. It's interesting. It's potential. But it's not real yet. But when that time comes, I'll just share a brief moment in my own. It's similar to where Nirmala was at. When I knew it was time for the path, I was literally reading The Path, Swami Kriyananda's autobiography, and it brought me to breathlessness. Just absolute. I just happened to notice at one point, after some pages had gone by, that I was no longer breathing. And not only was I not breathing, I really, really, really didn't want to breathe, because that stillness was so profound. So the peace was, beyond understanding, shall we say. It was like, but then of course I did start breathing again, but it was like, okay, we're doing something else with this incarnation. Maybe we thought we were going in one direction. Now it's time to go in a different one. And when that moment comes, and it comes in a different way for everyone, for some people it grows very, very gradually. For others, it's like from one moment to the next. It's a right-hand turn. It's a whatever. Go west, young man, which was literally the case for me from Chicago. But however it comes, when that moment comes, we will know it. There will be no mistake. But it starts in the heart.
I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, who made the heavens and the earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth, and He